Okay, we're recording. Hello. I got a chemical peel today, so if my face looks janky, that's why. Underneath all the makeup, it's low-key peeling. But hello, welcome back to the YouTube channel of Topaz of Brie. I'm so glad to be back. I struggled with YouTube. I was like, this is too much work. This is not what I meant to do. But guess what? I'm a Taurus moon, okay? It's Taurus season, okay? Third house transits, third house of content, third house of communication, third house of spreading your voice, maybe amplifying it in a way, which is kind of more 11th house. But I'm here. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to give you the content that I know all of you so desperately want. And also, I also desperately really want to give that content to you guys as well. So I'm excited to be here. Because it's been such a long time, I just want to give a quick little plug. I just released a Substack. Whoa, crazy. Substack with deep, in-depth horoscopes for each rising sign for every month. So the first edition of it drops on May 1st. That is going to be super, super tea. I've been working really hard on it, so I'm excited to get that to you guys. What are other things that are happening? I post on TikTok all the time. I try to do 2 videos a day. Sometimes we don't get there, but I post a lot of astrology content on TikTok. Instagram is also really great. The gap between my TikTok and my Instagram follower count is wide, so I would love to fix that. So if you're not following the Instagram, go ahead and follow that. Readings are still a thing. That's still a thing that's happening. And then I guess we're adding YouTube to the mix. I'm putting on my glasses to pull up my notes here for what I want to say, but let's get into it. Let's get into Taurus season. No more plugs. I'm really ready to talk about Taurus season. If you follow me on TikTok, you know that I am constantly talking about how much I love Taurus. Taurus season is my favorite season out of all of them, and I'm not a Taurus. I recently posted a video about how in love I am with Taurus women. Very, very true. I think they are God tier, as well as non-binary Tauruses or Taurians, whatever the plural of Taurus is, also God tier. The Taurus men, they're okay too. Like, they're some of the better men that I have discovered. But Taurus women, up here. And hopefully by the time that this comes out, I will have posted my video about how I think that Taurus is a black woman. So I just love you guys so much. But anyway, Taurus season, let's actually talk about what this means. So I feel like every year Taurus season gets flattened into the same 3 talking points. Slow down, treat yourself, go outside. And those things are definitely true, but I think that they're the surface of something much older and stranger and more philosophically interesting than just like a self-care checklist. So we're gonna really go deep on this one. Let's start at the beginning of what Taurus is. Taurus is the second sign of the zodiac. Aries is the first. Aries is the newborn. And then Taurus comes after it, which means Taurus's whole identity is structured around this idea of, okay, I exist, I have come into this world, but now what do I do with it? And the answer that Taurus gives is I sense, I touch, I taste, I find out what this body is capable of and what this body requires of me in order to feel safe in the world. Taurus is a fixed earth sign. Fixed means that it holds its position. It doesn't pivot easily, change easily. It doesn't respond well to people coming into its house and rearranging the furniture. Fixed signs want to deepen, not to disperse. And earth means that it operates through the physical, right? Not through ideas like air signs or feelings like water signs, but through actual tangible things, through soil and bread and skin and money and the specific weight of an object in your hand. Taurus is the sign that believes something is real because it can be touched. Venus rules it, and this matters a lot more than people tend to give it credit for because Venus is one of the great cosmic benefics. Venus is the lesser benefic, Jupiter is the greater, but calling Venus lesser is really just a matter of scale. It's a smaller planet. Jupiter gives abundance. Venus gives beauty and pleasure and the knowledge of what makes life worth living. And Taurus is the version of Venus that is a little bit more quiet, a little bit more embodied, a little bit more private. It's not the social Venus of Libra who kind of wants to charm the entire room. This Venus already knows what she wants and she simply moves towards it. So what does Taurus season actually feel like in the world? If you live in the Northern Hemisphere, it's late April through late May, which is the absolute peak of spring. This is full bloom. This is the lilacs. This is wisteria cascading over old walls. This is the moment when every tree in your neighborhood is blooming, right? And the light, it gets green and it gets dappled, right? There's this huge like sensory element to Taurus. You know, the air smells like something, the ground is soft, the birds are singing in a very aggressive way. I've been having to close my windows when I sleep. Taurus season is when nature essentially says, here, take all of it. It is yours. And ancient society all over the world pretty much understood this. I think pretty much every culture that developed an agricultural calendar treated this time of the year as sacred to fertility, to the earth, to the kind of abundance that has to be received rather than achieved. The Romans had Floralia, which ran from end of April to early May. It was one of the more exuberant Roman festivals. I think about 6 days of performances and games and this general looseness, because the point was to really honor the flowering of the world and to really invite that flowering into human life. The flower has no agenda. It just opens, right? That's Floralia. That's Taurus. Beltane falls at the midpoint of Taurus season, which in 2026 lands around May 5th. In Celtic tradition, Beltane is the fire festival that is the midpoint between the spring equinox and the summer solstice. Huge bonfires on hilltops, livestock driven between fires for protection, fertility rites, the world tipping into its fullness. Taurus is not shy about the sacred nature of earthly things. I think, in fact, Taurus really argues that earthly things are sacred. The flower, the fire, the body of the animal, the body of the person, these are all things that really matter. This is not a sign that believes the soul is trapped inside the body. Taurus believes the body is how the soul gets to know anything around it, anything in the world. Taurus is associated with the bull, which runs so deep in human religious history, it's almost dizzying to me. The bull was sacred in places like ancient Mesopotamia. The bull of heaven appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? Sent by the gods to destroy Gilgamesh and Enkidu, which they kill instead, I believe, which is one of the great acts of like human defiance against divine power in ancient literature. I read that a really, really long time ago, so if I'm wrong, I'm sorry. In ancient Egypt, you had Apis, the sacred bull of Memphis. The bull in Egyptian religion, I think, is this intersection between fertility and abundance and death and rebirth, all these things that Taurus understands very deeply, as well as its opposite sign of Scorpio. I also quickly want to talk about hedonism because it's interesting to me, but also because there's a version of Taurus content online that really stops at like treat yourself, and I find it really insufficient. Maybe it's because I'm a Taurus moon, but I think this question of whether Taurus energy is hedonistic is a real like philosophical one, and I think the answer is really nuanced, and it's just something that I want to talk about. So let me know in the comments what you think about what I'm about to say. So classical hedonism in the Epicurean sense is not what most people think it is. I've been doing so much research on it. I'm having a lot of fifth house transits. It's like I'm in there. I'm in the hedonism vibe. But Epicurus, who gets blamed for hedonism as a philosophy of pure sensory indulgence, actually argued for something much more Taurian than that. I think that he argued that the highest pleasure is not excess, but ataraxia. Pleasure for Epicurus was not about maximizing intensity. I think it was really about creating the conditions for sustained well-being, right? Good food with good friends, modest comfort, having a garden, right? Doing a simple thing. That to me is hedonism as a kind of wisdom. Taurus is deeply Epicurean to me. I think it's not interested in this dopamine hit of something. It's interested in the long, slow pleasure of something that keeps being good. A meal that takes 3 hours to make, right? A relationship that grows more comfortable over years. The physical space that has been adjusted and tended to until it is exactly right. The book that you read every year. The recipe that you've made so many times that you don't even need the card for it anymore. I think that is Taurus pleasure. It's not transgressive, it's not particularly exciting, but I think it is in the most possible way deeply satisfying. Where Taurus tips into the actual hedonism in like the negative sense is the kind that creates problems. It's this fixed nature, right? Fixed signs hold on. Taurus holds on to comfort, to pleasure, to the familiar, even when those things are no longer serving them. So the Taurus shadow isn't excess necessarily. It's more of this refusal to let go of excess once it's been established, right? It's the person who has one more glass of wine, not because they actually want it, but just because that's what they always do, right? It's a relationship that stopped working 2 years ago, but it feels too familiar for you to leave. It's the spending patterns that don't reflect your values, but does reflect your habits, your comfort zones. So the question Taurus season is always asking beneath the lilacs and the good food and the long naps of it all is which pleasures are genuinely yours and which ones are just inertia, which comforts are actually comforting and which ones are just comfort zones, right? What are you holding on to because it's good, and what are you holding on to because Taurus hates change and you haven't built a strong enough reason yet to let it go? Those are not self-care questions. Those are values questions. And I think that that is what Taurus season, when really looked at in this deeper way, I know I really got into it, is essentially asking of you every single year. The sensory richness of this season, right? The flowers and the warmth and the good food and the body waking up again after winter. It's not a distraction from those questions, but I think it's the context for it, right? You can't question your values in the abstract. Taurus doesn't work in abstractions. You have to feel it. You have to be in your body, in contact with the physical texture of your actual life to understand what you actually want versus maybe what you've been telling yourself you want. And that really is the tea. That when we really get this deep into it, these are the things that we uncover with Taurus. This year, Taurus season is heavier than usual. There's a lot happening, but even in a heavy Taurus season, the message is the same. Get in your body first. Slow down enough to feel what you actually need to feel. Let the world be beautiful. It's spring. The lilacs are going to bloom for 2 weeks and then they're done until next year. And every year that's news to someone for some reason. But don't miss these things around you because you're on your phone. We are about to go through some genuinely historic transits during this season. I'm going to take you through all of them, but none of it will literally mean anything if you're doing it from your head instead of your body. And that's the difference between, let's say, Taurus and Gemini. And I mentioned that because Gemini season is next. But anyway, that's what Taurus season is for. Let's get into the transits. It is so freaking hot. It's 80 degrees and it's April. What is that? Okay, enough of my complaining. Let's get into it. So the first thing that happens on the first day of Taurus season technically happens before Taurus season starts. On April 19th, Mars and Saturn meet in Aries. 2 hours and 56 minutes later, the sun crosses the Taurus line and the season starts. So we are entering the season of beauty and pleasure and the flowering earth with this conjunction still very much hot in the sky. And so I had to, of course, include it. Mars and Saturn are the two malefics in traditional astrology. The word malefic gets treated like a slur in modern astrology discourse, which I think is so funny. Malefic doesn't mean evil. It means difficult. It means that these are planets associated with the parts of life that really require something from you, something of pressure. Mars and Saturn don't naturally like each other. Mars wants to move, Saturn wants to stop. They're not enemies exactly, but they are not comfortable together. So when they conjoin, all of that tension is happening in the same place at the same time. And this conjunction is happening in Aries, which is Mars's own domicile, his home sign, which means that in this conjunction, Mars is actually in the stronger position here. He is the host. Saturn is the guest. Saturn's an uncomfortable guest at the dinner table and then kind of points everything out that is wrong with the house. Saturn's a grumpy old man. The image that I keep coming back to for this conjunction is you've been running, right? Running on Aries energy for the whole of Aries season, which if you've been paying attention to the broader 2026 astrology has been genuinely relentless. Aries season this year was a lot. Saturn and Neptune, both freshly in Aries, a Chiron conjunction at the new moon, Mars activating all of it as it moved through the sign. Aries season 2026 was essentially the astrological equivalent of being handed a very important assignment with no instructions and then being told to figure it out by Friday. And then 2 hours before Taurus season begins, Mars walks directly into Saturn. You hit a wall. Not the kind of wall that like breaks you or anything, but the kind that really stops you long enough so that you have to really look around and figure out where the hell you are, right? This conjunction lands differently depending on where Aries falls in your chart. So I would definitely check out that Aries ruled house. But across the board, there's this quality of being asked to account for yourself. What have you built this year? What have you started that is actually real versus maybe what you started that's kind of just vibes and like intentions and not anything real yet? Saturn will accept that honest answer. I think Saturn actually respects an honest answer, even if that answer is I don't know yet, or I haven't built anything for myself this year. If you've been doing the work, right? If you've been building something real for yourself, even imperfectly, even slowly, even in the middle of everything else that this year has thrown at you, I think that this conjunction actually validates that. It's not a restriction. Mars, Saturn, and Aries for a person who has genuinely been disciplined, genuinely been working, feels like a hard task getting done. I think there's a lot of satisfaction to that personally. Now, Mars conjunct Saturn and Aries in the context of 2026, which has already been an enormous institutional pressure, a year of leaders and systems being tested in ways they weren't designed for, is an aspect of tension within power, within force. Mars rules armies and police and aggression and competitive action, male energy in its most assertive, most destructive forms. Saturn rules governments, authority structures, institutions, the law, the mechanisms by which societies enforce their rules on themselves. So when these two planets meet in this cardinal fire sign that is itself associated with conquest and initiative and this I am first mentality, I think you get a moment that's pretty destructive. This aspect has historically correlated with significant military developments, with governments making really big moves that they can't take back, with the eruption of conflicts that have been building pressure for some time. I'm not going to tell you some sort of specific geopolitical prediction because I don't think that's going to be helpful. But I will say, if you've been watching a situation in the world and thinking, this is not going to work, I think April 19th and the surrounding days are going to be huge for our military and our government. The other thing I'll say is that Mars conjunct Saturn in Aries is an aspect associated with masculinity and crisis. Aries rules men, or more precisely, it rules the archetype of aggressive, initiated force that our culture has historically coded as masculine. Saturn in Aries is already asking really profound questions about whether these structures of power are sustainable, whether the way strength has been defined and deployed is working, whether the models of leadership and dominance that got us here are fit for where we need to go as a world, as a country, whatever. So Mars joining Saturn at this degree, it really sharpens that question to a point. Somewhere in the news cycle around April 19th, I would really bet on a story that's really about that question, right? A powerful man or institution of men facing consequences, right? It's not going to be satisfying in a clean way. It's not going to be satisfying at all. For you personally, yes, satisfying, but through this more mundane political lens, no, right? Saturn is not justice. Saturn is consequence, which is a much different and much colder thing. 2 hours later, the sun enters Taurus, aka Taurus season officially begins. Now, in the beginning of this video, I went pretty deep into the Taurus of it all, but I do want to say that in astrology, the sun in Taurus is not the sun at its best. The sun is in its exaltation in Aries, which is where it was for the past 30 days, right? Bright, dominant, fully expressed. Taurus is not an exaltation sign for the sun. So what that means is that the sun's energy in Taurus is more subdued, more interior, less about radiating outward and more about tending to what's already been established. This is not the sun at its most heroic, literally at all, but it is a sun of being human. And that's important. The sun in Taurus really cares about real things. It cares about warmth and food and the feeling of the ground underneath your feet and the actual people in the room versus maybe rather the impression that it's making on the room. So if we're talking about the collective, I think Taurus season is when the news cycle, which has obviously been insane and been running through Aries energy for a month, should theoretically slow down. And I say theoretically because 2026 is not a year that slows down easily. We are in a war after all, but there is a quality shift, right? The headlines might still be as loud, but the underlying question changes from what is happening right now to maybe what does this all mean? What are the material consequences to what's happening right now? Taurus forces everything to land somewhere. It asks of every situation, okay, but who is actually being affected and how, and in their bodies and in their wallets, how is this all really landing, right? And I think that that in itself really adds a lot to the political discourse. It makes things very literal. Materialism in the most literal sense. What does this cost and who pays it, right? I can't stress enough how much the sun being in Taurus illuminates your physical reality. You will notice more what feels good, what feels depleting. Hunger comes back in a really clean, really uncomplicated way. Sleep starts to feel like something that you're actually doing rather maybe than something that's happening to you. You remember that you have a body that has preferences and that some of those preferences have maybe been completely ignored for the past month. Okay, the flowers are blooming and the air smells like something and your body knows that and it wants to orient toward it, so let it. 5 days into Taurus season, Venus leaves Taurus and it enters Gemini. And the first thing I want to say, it's a little bittersweet. Venus in Taurus is Venus at home, right? During Venus's time in Taurus, which began in late March, there was this quality of genuine sensory richness available to us. Pleasure was accessible, the relationship between ourselves and the physical world was relatively uncomplicated, beauty was just there to be received, right? That's Venus in her own sign. She's not trying to do anything, she's just being. And because she's being, everything around her participates in that beauty. Granted, this was like one Taurus placement out of all of the 1,000 other Aries placements that was happening during Aries season. But Venus entering Gemini changes all of that. Gemini is a Mercury ruled sign, quicksilver, curious, dual-natured, interested in everything all at once. Venus in Gemini is not less pleasurable than Venus in Taurus, but the pleasure, it's just a different kind. Where Taurus pleasure is slow and sensory and deep, Gemini pleasure is quick and verbal and varied. Venus in Gemini loves a conversation more than a meal. She wants to know what you're thinking, not just how you smell. She falls a little bit in love with everyone, right, that she finds interesting, and she finds a lot of people interesting, and she will absolutely not apologize for that, right? This is a genuinely fun placement for Venus. I really, really love Venus and Geminis, although I know that they get so much hate. This is social and relational energy. It has this quality of lightness and curiosity that functions as a nice counterbalance to maybe the heavier transits that are going to be happening during the same period, which we'll get to. But Venus and Gemini gets a bad rep, as I said before, but I personally love it. I think that if there is an energy in your relational life right now of things maybe feeling too serious, right, too weighted with meaning, Venus and Gemini is the permission to flirt, right? Flirt with ideas and people and possibilities without having to immediately figure out what they all mean. Venus in Gemini is also, in a collective sense, a shift in what we value in communication. Taurus Venus valued things that lasted, things that were made with craft and with care, so like handwritten letters, right? An album that you return to. But Venus in Gemini values the quick, the clever, the articulate, right? The person who can say the right thing at the right moment, wit as a form of beauty, conversation as a form of intimacy. This is a good few weeks for media, for storytelling, for any kind of work that happens in language. The thing to watch with Venus in Gemini is commitment. Gemini is mutable, which means it changes. Venus in Gemini can mistake excitement for desire. Oops. It can start things, it's not going to finish. It can flirt with a direction without quite being willing to choose it. And I think the antidote is not to become more Taurian about it, like more possessive and rooted and determined, but to just let Venus in Gemini be what it is, a time of gathering information about what you want without forcing that information to crystallize prematurely. I think that you are allowed to not know yet. You are allowed to be interested in more than one thing or person. This is not cheating propaganda, okay? But I think Gemini's whole argument is that certainty is overrated and that you'll make a better decision when you get some more data. There's one more thing I want to say about Venus entering Gemini, which is that she is walking directly toward Uranus, which we will get to right after this. Venus enters Gemini at 0 degrees. Uranus is arriving at 0 degrees Gemini the very next day. They are moving together. So this is not a standard Venus ingress. This is Venus walking into the most disruptive planet in our solar system's arms as they both cross into this new territory simultaneously. The conjunction between Venus and Uranus happened once already, a day or two before this ingress at the very last degree of Taurus. And 29 degrees of any sign is one of the most potent positions in the zodiac. It's the degree of finality of something that has been built over years, reaching its last possible expression before the sign closes. So a Venus-Uranus conjunction at 29 degrees of Taurus, right, this last gasp of Earth era, is the cosmos making a very specific statement. What you valued is about to be unrecognizable. What has been stable in the domain of resources and beauty and relationships and money in the physical world, everything Taurus has essentially been building since 2018 is now crossing a threshold that cannot be uncrossed. And then they both walk into Gemini and a different world begins. And that brings me now to Uranus and Gemini. I could make an entire video on Uranus and Gemini itself. I need you to actually understand how rare this is. Uranus takes approximately 84 years to complete one orbit around the sun. That means it spends roughly 7 years at each sign. 7 years in Uranus and Taurus, which we have just lived through, right? Which remade our relationship to money and our bodies and the earth and physical security in ways that we are still 100% processing. It doesn't just end because the transit ends. And before that, 7 years of Uranus in Aries from 2010 to 2018, which remade identity and selfhood in ways that I think will, once again, be understanding for another decade. Every 7 years, this electric charge moves to a new part of the sky. Every 7 years, a different domain of life gets essentially struck by lightning. This sun is beaming on my face. Oh my God, I'm so hot. Uranus has been in Gemini, but it went back in Taurus, but now it's like back for real. The last time Uranus was in Gemini was 1941. It stayed until 1949. Before that, 1858 to, I have to look at my notes for this one. I don't have it committed to memory. 1858 to 1865. Before that, 1774 to 1781. Okay, 1774 to 1781 is the American Revolution. The American Revolution was inseparable from a revolution in printed speech. We know this. Thomas Paine's Common Sense, published in January 1776, I believe, sold an estimated 500,000 copies in a country of 2.5 million people. That's a crazy number. The revolution didn't just happen in battlefields, which is what I think a lot of people are focusing on right now when they're dissecting our astrology currently. But a lot of it happened in pamphlets and broadsides and the sudden, furious multiplication of political language that was accessible to ordinary people for the first time in a new way. Uranus and Gemini. 1858 to 1865, American Civil War, which is also about information in a way that doesn't get discussed nearly enough. The telegraph, the first communications technology that allowed information to move faster. Military intelligence transformed overnight. Newspapers receiving dispatches from battlefields in nearly near real time for the first time in history. Photography, bringing the face of war into people's living rooms, right? So much propaganda, right? Two opposing national narratives running simultaneously on people's TVs. It was the beginning of a world where information really became a weapon. Uranus and Gemini. 1941 to 1949, World War II and its aftermath, Radio, mass propaganda tool, coded intelligence, the Manhattan Project. After the war, the Cold War beginning, which is in significant part an information war, the birth of the CIA, right? So many different things, all very Uranus and Gemini coded. And now 2026, I want you to sit with that lineage for a moment. I didn't give you that brief and maybe not the best history lesson to scare you, but more so that you can understand that these are not gentle periods of intellectual curiosity and like friendly exchange. These are periods when the control of information becomes a matter of survival, when the question of who gets to say what is true, who controls the means of communication, who has access to knowledge and who is denied it, because those all really become a central political question. These are periods when communication technology leaps forward in ways that create enormous possibility for our society, but also enormous danger, and when the social and political systems that have to manage that technology are completely unprepared for it. We are entering that kind of period again, and I think most of us already know this on some level, right? Because we have been watching it begin. Uranus and Gemini is going to destabilize our information world, how we know what we know, who we trust to tell us the truth, what the difference between a real thing and a generated thing even means anymore. It's very confusing right now. And that confusion is only going to spike. I think the role of human communication and human authorship in a world where those things can be replicated and remixed and fabricated at a speed and scale that is genuinely unprecedented, even on the historical timeline I just gave you, is crazy. Thomas Paine could print 500,000 copies of Common Sense, but Uranus and Gemini in 2026 means that anyone, anywhere can generate 500,000 versions of anything and push them out to every device on Earth before breakfast. Do I have thoughts about AI specifically? Sure. I think the AI conversation is the Uranus and Gemini conversation, and I don't think that we should be coy about that. What we are witnessing is a revolution in the generation of language itself, which is the most specifically Gemini domain possible, right? Language is how Gemini thinks, communicates, understands, and constructs reality. Uranus, this planet of disruption and electricity and sudden irreversible change, arriving in that sign for 7 years at this precise moment in history, right? I think is not a coincidence. That is the astrology giving context to what is already happening. The question Uranus and Gemini poses is not whether this technology will change things, it will. The question is whether we are going to be awake to what is changing and make intentional choices about it, or whether maybe we're going to just let the disruption happen to us and call it progress. This is an extremely nuanced and complex transit, and I think the historical record on this is mixed, right? 1776 turned out okay broadly. 1941 was catastrophic before it resolved anything. The outcome is not predetermined, right? It is determined by what people do, what people say, and how we interact with the world around us. And also depends, as it always does, on what people choose to pay attention to and what they decide to do about it. And on a political level, wait, isn't this all political that I'm talking about? Uranus in Gemini is going to be merciless to anyone who is trying to control information, okay? Every tendency in contemporary politics depends on information control. Controlling what the population knows, controlling the narrative, controlling which voices get amplified and which get buried. And I think that Uranus in Gemini is the chaos agent in that project. It breaks the dam, it goes around the firewall, it creates new channels of communication faster than old systems can close the existing ones. And that is genuinely good news if you believe in free information and democratic discourse, and genuinely terrifying news if you've been watching how destabilized the information ecosystem already is and wondering how much more destabilized it can get. Both things are true. Two things can be true at once. Once again, nuance, complex, textured. For individual people, wherever 0 degrees to 5 degrees of Gemini falls in your birth chart is where this transit is going to make itself known first. Gemini in your 7th house, relationships are about to become unpredictable and interesting. Gemini on your 2nd house, and the way that you earn and value things is being completely changed. Gemini on your 1st house, and this is your personal reinvention period of the decade. The conjunction of Uranus to any natal planet in those early Gemini degrees is a direct activation 100%, and I would encourage you all to look at your chart because the areas where Uranus touches are not optional. They will change. And your job is to change with them rather than kind of dig in and resist, which is a hard ask during Taurus season when the whole energy of the sky is saying, hold on and root down and like, let's be grounded. Taurus and Uranus are in natural opposition in this way, but I do think that you can still stay rooted in your values while allowing circumstances to transform. Easier said than done, but That's my assignment for you guys during this Taurus season. One last thing, I mentioned Venus walking into Gemini the day before Uranus arrives, and I want to come back to that very, very quickly because I think the specific image of these two planets entering the same sign together is worth kind of stewing on, meditating on. Venus is the planet of what we love and value and want. Uranus is the planet of disruption and liberation in the future. So when they enter new territory together, what you love is about to be liberated and disrupted simultaneously. You are going to discover that some things you thought maybe you wanted are actually just comfort zones, and you're going to also discover, probably unexpectedly, some things you want that you didn't even know you wanted, that you didn't even know existed yet. I think Uranus and Gemini's greatest gift is the option that you hadn't considered, the conversation you didn't expect to have, the idea that changes everything, right? So keep that in mind over the next 7 years if you can remember. I think what I like to sit with in terms of Uranus and Gemini through a more personal lens is that sometimes the most important thing might not be coming from the direction that you're currently looking at. In terms of this video, Taurus season is grounding you for exactly that reason. You need roots in order to handle a lightning strike.
Okay, so it's been over 6 months definitely since I recorded a YouTube video, and I realized just now that my mic station, my filming station, all of it is just, it's not right. So I unplugged everything and I'm just putting my headphones in. Hopefully the audio was not janky up until this point because we still have so much to go over. The sun is beaming on my face. I'm dehydrated, but I gotta get this info to you guys too. And if anyone says that my skin looks amazing, thank you. Once again, chemical peel did happen this morning at 10 a.m. But I am starting to get a little bit tired, so I needed to like drink a Celsius. I checked out my mic station, figured out everything was set up incorrectly. So now we're back. So let's get into the Scorpio full moon. This is the first full moon of Taurus season that we'll be talking about. This full moon in Scorpio, this is the flower moon that blooms in the dark. So let's break this down. So Taurus and Scorpio are their opposite signs, they're sister signs. They share the same modality, which is fixed, which means that they are both signs that hold their position, that finish what they start, but they're in fundamental tension with each other, right? We know that Taurus is this sign of what is mine, my body, my resources, my values, my land, my comfort, my possessions, the things that I have accumulated through effort and kept through will. Scorpio is the sign of what we share, what cannot be owed, what moves between people, intimacy, debt, inheritance, sexuality, death, the resources that belong to no one and everyone, the things that are exchanged in the dark. In traditional astrology, Scorpio is ruled by the planet Mars, and that's really important, right? Mars, as we established earlier in the video, is this planet of conflict and desire and the body in its most animal aspects. In Scorpio, Mars energy, it goes underground. It doesn't shout, but it observes. It remembers everything and says nothing until the moment that it really decides to act, and at which point it acts completely. Scorpio is extremely strategic in the way that only very patient anger is strategic. It is also, in its highest expression, the sign of genuine transformation, of an ego that has been willing to die for something and came back changed. The scorpion is one of its symbols, obviously, but so is the eagle, the animal that sees everything from above without getting tangled in it. And so is the phoenix, which is not really like a Scorpio symbol exactly, but I do think it should be. But I think because Scorpio understands better than any sign what it costs to really become something that you weren't before, to really rise from the ashes, from your like death, which can be a psychological death, if you will. When I think about Scorpio and Taurus really in that axis as sister signs, I think of Persephone. Persephone, daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, grain, the earth, who was taken by Hades into the underworld and who ate 6 pomegranate seeds, which bound her to the underworld for half of every year. My real Greek mythology girl is coming out right now. But her return in Greek mythology is why things grow. Her descent into autumn is why things die. She is the movement between Taurus and Scorpio made mythological. I should so make a TikTok video about this. You know what? Stay tuned for that because I'm definitely going to talk about that on TikTok. But what people forget about Persephone is that she doesn't just like survive the underworld, she becomes its queen, okay? She becomes the guide for souls navigating the dark. The descent changes her. She comes back not as the girl who was taken, but as someone who has been to the bottom and really learned what's down there. And to bring my inner Greek mythology girly side back to this video, that is the gift of this full moon. Not the descent itself, but what the descent makes possible for you. And at 11 degrees of Scorpio, it hits the fixed signs hardest: Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius between roughly 7 and 15 degrees. If you have personal planets there, this full moon is definitely very personal. It is landing directly on something in your chart, and it's asking that part of your chart to really come to life and be illuminated. Scorpio, if we really want to get crazy and pair it with the 8th house, I kind of go back and forth on doing this. It rules everything we don't talk about. Right? It rules debt in the literal sense. So money you owe, money owed to you, the financial arrangements that live underneath your life. It rules sexuality not as entertainment, but as a site of actual power exchange and vulnerability. It rules the things you have inherited from people who came before you. So literally in the form of like estates and money, and psychologically in the forms of patterns and wounds and ways of being that were handed down without a label on them. And it rules endings, right? The things that have run their course and need to complete. So this full moon is kind of an illumination of all that. I always think that Scorpio full moons are like completion final bosses. Whatever has been simmering in your Scorpio ruled house, whatever you have been avoiding because it requires maybe a level of honesty that feels like exposure, this is when it comes to light. And not necessarily anything dramatic like externally. Sometimes Scorpio full moons are quiet. Sometimes there's a revelation that happens internally at like 2 a.m. when you finally let yourself think the thoughts that you have been avoiding. On a collective level, full moons in Scorpio are associated with financial power dynamics becoming visible, with the mechanisms of who controls wealth and how, with the relationship between debt and power kind of coming into public view. Given where 2026 is politically and economically, given that we are in a year defined by enormous pressure on financial systems and the structures that govern them, I think that this full moon is probably going to coincide with something in that domain surfacing, right? Who owes what to whom? Maybe a deal that was made quietly is now having consequences in the public eye. Scorpio doesn't let things stay buried forever, right? This is definitely a full moon that digs. Digs is a great word I like to associate with the fixed signs. Also on May 1st, it's a full moon on the workers' holiday, a Scorpio full moon on International Workers' Day in 2026, when the relationship between labor and capital is being renegotiated in ways we haven't seen in generations, when the question of who owns your time and your body and your output has never been more contested. I think that's important. I think that's relevant. Given everything I said, maybe money your employer holds and decides to give or withhold from you. It rules power dynamics in their most structural form. Pull up your Scorpio ruled house, whatever life theme or life area lives there, the curtain is being pulled back right now 100%. And my advice is not to panic at what's revealed, but to really be honest about it. I think Scorpio respects honesty even when it hurts. What Scorpio can't work with is pretense. So if this full moon brings something into the light that you have been pretending isn't there, the only move is to look at it directly, name it, sit with it, and then figure out what it really needs. The day after the full moon, Mercury moves into Taurus, and the timing here is almost too perfect. You just had a Scorpio full moon, something surfaced, something came up, something was illuminated that has been underground, and now Mercury, the planet of the mind and communication and how we process information, moves into the sign of slowness and deliberateness, and I need to think about this for a while before I actually say anything. Mercury in Taurus is the transit that follows a revelation and then says, okay, now let's sit with this. Now let's figure out what it means before we do anything about it. Mercury in Taurus, it's one of the more underrated placements, I think. I think it gets criticized for being slow and stubborn and not particularly nimble. All those things are true. It takes time. It circles back. It needs to feel the thought out rather than just think it. But what you get in exchange for that slowness is something extremely valuable. You get thoroughness. Mercury in Taurus is excellent for financial conversations, for contracts, for negotiations, for decisions about money and resources and what you're willing to commit to. I think Mercury in Taurus is deliberate in a way that actually really protects you in these situations. It doesn't rush. It reads the fine print. It asks, what are we actually agreeing to here in concrete terms? What does this cost of me? What do I get? Can I rely on this? All important questions. These are extremely useful questions to be asking in the days following a Scorpio full moon that may have triggered something in your financial or resource landscape. A few days later, Mars is in Aries, Jupiter is in Cancer, and they form a square. Mars square Jupiter is one of the most characteristically overconfident aspects in astrology, in the way of someone who is genuinely, sincerely certain that they can pull something off, and they haven't fully accounted for the gap between their enthusiasm and the resources that are actually available to them. Mars Mars square Jupiter is this energy of launching before you're ready, of spending more than you actually have, of saying yes to more than you can deliver, starting a fight that is bigger than you planned for because you were so sure of yourself in the moment that you didn't stop to measure the distance between or to the other side. It's just super overconfident energy. Mars in Aries is in its absolute home sign. This is Mars at maximum confidence, maximum drive, maximum I can do this and I will do this and anyone who doubts me is wrong kind of energy. Jupiter in Cancer is in its exaltation, which is the sign that Jupiter is considered to be functioning at its best at. This is a Jupiter that believes in abundance and really wants to give and receive abundantly. Guys, please pray that I don't pass out right now. This sun is actually beaming on my face so hard I can't even see my screen. I can't even see my notes. I'm just like free falling here. But anyway, both of these placements are strong. The problem is that when two strong placements form a square, neither one of them is inclined to yield. They both want what they want and they both think that they're right. So you might feel in the days around May 4th, May 5th that you can do considerably more than what is actually advisable, right? This impulse to expand, to launch, to commit, to declare, to fight for something, to invest in something, that will all be really high. The calculation of whether that thing actually has support underneath it, that might be a little bit lower than usual. Me being a Pisces rising, a lot of like words come to my mind, a lot of imagery comes to my mind when I go through these kinds of things. And the word that keeps coming to my mind with this aspect is the word spectacular. If you have something that has been genuinely prepared and is ready to launch, this is a really useful aspect behind it, especially if you're cardinal dominant. It's a lot of energy. It's not sophisticated energy, but it is powerful energy. So a well-aimed move under this aspect can go further than it would under like quieter skies. But the key phrase of that is well aimed. On the mundane level, Mars square Jupiter is historically associated with overreach by powerful figures and institutions. You know, the military action that goes further than intended, the economic announcement that assumes more market confidence than what actually exists. Jupiter in Cancer also has a very nationalist flavor to it, right? This tendency to conflate one's own people with the right people and one's own cause with the righteous cause. So Mars squaring that from Aries can look like a lot of aggressive nationalism. You know, watch the news around May 4th, May 5th with that frame in mind, because something somewhere is going to overreach. But I guess the question is where and by how much. Pluto stations retrograde after that, which means that the planet of death and transformation and underground power goes inward. Don't be scared of the word retrograde. It just means to go inward, to move internally. Pluto stations retrograde once a year for about 5 months, so it's not a surprise. It is scheduled, and yet I see it treated in two opposite directions that both feel weird to me. Either it gets catastrophized, like Pluto retrograde is going to destroy you, which is extremely overdramatic and not particularly useful, or it gets dismissed as this background outer planet thing that doesn't really affect your life. Both of those are completely wrong. So let me tell you what Pluto actually is first. So in traditional astrology, Pluto is not one of the 7 classical planets. It's a modern addition. But of course, to me, the mythology assigned to it is pretty important. Pluto is Hades. Hades is not death. He is the god who rules the kingdom of the dead, which is a different thing, right? He's not malevolent. In mythology, he's described as unyielding, but also as just, I think. I think that his realm is not a punishment, it's more of a destination, right? Everything goes there eventually. Everybody eventually dies, so everyone has to go there. His dominion is the underworld, not because the underworld is bad, but because someone has to be in charge. Someone has to be in charge of the underground, right? Someone has to be in charge of what is hidden, what has descendant, what is not yet ready to return. Hades was also called Pluton, I believe, which means the wealthy one, because the earth's riches, its minerals, its metals, and the deep fertility that comes from decay all belong to him, right? The gold is underground. The darkness is where things get composted essentially into new growth. So anyway, because I have all that context about Hades, my favorite Greek mythology person, Pluto in astrology to me carries that dual nature, right? Destroyer and fertilizer. It's kind of like the prerequisite for the next beginning. It's not really like a bad thing. Pluto is currently in Aquarius, which it entered in 2023 and will inhabit until 2044. This is a long arc transit, right? It's one that is constantly over the next 20 years going to be really shaping an entire generation. The one that is reshaping collective systems, democratic structures, the relationship between the individual and the group, the question of what humanity does with its technology and what technology does with humanity, right? This is in no way a short-term conversation. This is 20 years. So when Pluto stations retrograde in Aquarius, it turns its excavating energy inward. Pluto direct is Pluto operating in the external world. The institutions crumbling, the power structures shifting, the things buried coming to the surface, whether we kind of wanted them to or not. Pluto retrograde is that same energy directed inward. It's the question of what you personally are participating in that you haven't fully examined. Guys, I had to move. Things were getting serious. I literally genuinely thought I was about to pass out, so I had to move locations to my living room. But I do know that I was talking about Pluto retrograde, and Pluto retrograde is the season of shadow work. I mean, we have lots and lots of months, and not shadow work in the performative social media sense, but in the Carl Jung sense, right? The encounter with the parts of yourself that maybe you have banished to the basement because they were inconvenient or frightening or not compatible with the person that you're trying to be. You know, I think that Pluto doesn't really let you keep those thoughts or anything down there forever. Retrograde, it sends you to visit them voluntarily, which is, I think, genuinely better than maybe the alternative of waiting until they break themselves out. So we kind of want to tackle that head on. In Aquarius specifically, Pluto retrograde from May through October, it's asking you to really examine your relationship to collective identity and systems. What groups do you belong to out of genuine alignment? Which ones are you in out of fear or inertia or the social cost of leaving? What about the systems that you participate in on the daily, the platforms, the institutions, the economic structures, right? Where are you complicit in something that maybe you would not endorse if you really thought about it, right? It's not a guilt question. Pluto doesn't do guilt. I think guilt keeps you stuck, but Pluto retrograde is really asking about power, right? Where is yours located? How are you actually using it? And would you change if you used your power differently? All things to consider. This retrograde period lasts until mid-October, so that is 100% a really long season of internal excavation. You don't have to do all of it at once. Pluto is patient, but May 6th is when that shift happens, and I think noticing maybe what comes up for you in the month around this station is definitely worth paying attention to. Okay, now we have arrived at the center of the season, the new moon in Taurus at almost 26 degrees, and this is the late territory of the sign. This is Taurus having already moved through its early exuberance, through the middle developmental work, and now it's arriving at something approaching completion. It's mature, right? It's not the fresh, maybe naive energy of a new moon at 0 or 1 degree of the sign. It's been around, it knows things. This new moon aligns with Mercury and it widely harmonizes with Jupiter, meaning that your mind is clear. There's going to be this quality of genuine optimism available to you. Mercury conjunct this new moon. It's really important because it means the intentions that you set are not purely emotional or instinctual. They're actually going to be articulated, right? They're going to be thought through. Mercury and Taurus at this degree is deliberate and thorough, and having it exactly conjunct the new moon means that what you begin now begins with a plan, not just like a manifestation or a wish. This new moon is also a super moon, meaning that the moon is at its closest approach to Earth in its orbit. We're really going to be able to see this one. Supermoons carry a strong gravitational pull, and astrologically, they're considered one of the more powerful lunations. So intentions that are set during a supermoon, new moon, have a quality of amplification to them, right? The seed that is planted a little bit deeper. Now, what do Taurus new moon intentions actually look like in practice? Because I think set intentions can become a phrase that kind of floats above the actual thing that Taurus requires from you. As I said earlier, Taurus does not do intentions in the abstract. Taurus wants to know, what are you specifically going to do with the actual hands that you have and your actual time and your actual money and actually in the physical world. A Taurus new moon intention is not going to be, I want to feel more financially secure. It's going to be, I'm going to open the account I've been meaning to open and put a specific amount of money in it on a specific day every single month. It's not, I want a healthier relationship with my body. It's, I'm going to go to sleep 8 hours tonight and I'm going to cook breakfast tomorrow when I wake up, and then I'm going to do it again the day after that. It's specific. Taurus starts with the one next physical action, and then it does it again and again until it's structure. The question this new moon is asking is, what are you going to build over the next 6 months that will have actual weight and substance when you look back on it, right? Not what you're going to think about building, not what you wish to build, but what are you actually going to build? This is going to be a moment to really commit to that in writing if possible, with a specific first step kind of identified, right? Mercury conjunct, I think, is really going to help. Your mind is going to be sharp. The vision and the practicality are definitely aligned. So practically for the next 6 months leading up to the Scorpio full moon in November, what you begin now during this domain of Taurus, your money, your body, your physical environment, your creative work, your relationship with pleasure and beauty and material security, all of those are going to reach kind of a peak in November. So plant accordingly, right? Think about who or what you want to be by November, right? Not just next week. Taurus does not rush, and neither should you. The morning after the new moon, you've just planted the seed, the soil is fresh, and then Mercury walks into Gemini, and the whole quality of the sky kind of shifts upward by about 40 volts. Mercury in Gemini is Mercury at home. Gemini is one of Mercury's 2 domiciles, and Gemini is the daytime face of Mercury, I like to call it, because it's action oriented. Maybe that's not the right word. It's just very external. It's oriented outward, right? Curious, social, quick, verbal, endlessly interested in what's happening and what people are saying about it and what it means and what they think about what it means. This is not a transit that sits still. Mercury in Gemini does not sit still. It has already thought of 3 things to say before you finish your sentence, and it is genuinely trying to be polite about it. And after the deliberateness of Mercury in Taurus, I think this ingress is going to feel kind of like a gear change. A gear change so abrupt that you might get a little bit of whiplash. You know, that's definitely how Taurus and Gemini and that shift happens. So I'm excited to talk about that shift when we get to the Gemini season video. But Mercury and Gemini will want to talk about things and analyze and reframe and share and look at things from 12 different angles and then do it again with different words. So the quality of your mind, it shifts from tactile to aerial, right? From what does this feel like in my body to maybe what does this mean and who can I tell about it? That's very Gemini. Practically, fantastic transit for writing, for communication, for learning something new quickly, for conversations that move fast and cover real ground. I do think anything Gemini related is important in 2026, right? Mercury is walking into the same sign Uranus just entered. By now, Uranus is sitting at 1 degree of Gemini. Mercury enters at 0. So within days, they will be within orb of each other. And when Mercury and Uranus connect in the same sign, it's one of the more electrically interesting alignments in astrology for sure. Mercury activates Uranus. It turns the revolutionary frequency up, right? Ideas that were maybe theoretical become really urgent. Information that seemed abstract becomes suddenly actionable, right? There is this quality to Mercury-Uranus transits of an unexpected arrival, right? Something you didn't know you needed to know. Now you need to know, right? It lands in your inbox, right? A conversation becomes necessary. And I think in the context of the Uranus-Gemini era that we're in, this is all kind of just beginning. Mercury entering Gemini and immediately reaching toward Uranus, it's kind of the first real activation of that 7-year transit by a fast-moving planet. Venus obviously aligned with Uranus as we discussed earlier, but Mercury is a super, super quick planet. So this is a fast-moving kind of energy, right? Pay attention to what you learn and think about and say in the days immediately following May 17th. You might be getting a preview of maybe the themes that will define the next several years of your intellectual and your communicative life. The shadow of Mercury in Gemini, as always, maybe you can guess, is scatter, right? The very speed that makes this transit so intellectually alive can also make it impossible to finish anything. You can start 12 things and complete literally none of them and feel extremely busy in the meantime. Let your Gemini mind, if you are a Gemini, explore freely, okay? Honestly, even if you're not a Gemini, let your mind explore freely and then let the Taurus foundation of the season and maybe Mercury in Taurus, that foundation, pull you back to whatever you actually said that you were going to do. Moving on, Mars has been in Aries since April 9th, which should have been energizing and mostly was, except that Saturn was there the whole time and the conjunction on April 19th and the square to Jupiter on May 4th and before the ingress Mars crossed Chiron. So actually, it's kind of been busy and pressured and maybe a painful Mars transit. The war energy has been in full effect since Mars was in Aries, but now it's going into Taurus. Mars in Taurus is in play from May 18th through June 28th, and during this cycle, the overall energy is determined, stubborn, and resolute. Mars in Taurus can be passive until provoked, and is at its strongest when it's kind of digging in its heels, it's defending something, it's outlasting something. This is a sign with stamina, a sign with memory. It's not the Mars that kind of throws a punch and then moves on. This is a Mars that makes a decision and then implements it step by step, day by day, without losing track of where it's going or why it decided to go there in the first place. Mars in Taurus is the long project, 100%, something that requires 6 weeks of daily effort before anything visible changes, a business plan that gets worked on at the same exact time every single morning, a body that gets trained at the same time every single morning. Mars in Taurus, it doesn't require inspiration, it requires showing up. And I think the contrast with Aries energy that we've been living in, it's going to be pretty dramatic. I think it's going to feel a little confusing at first, right? The urgency drops, the pace drops, something that maybe felt really pressing and immediate 3 weeks ago suddenly feels containable, like something that can be worked on over time rather than just something that gets reacted to. For some people, that decompression will feel like a relief, but I think for a lot of people who have been running on this adrenaline for so long, maybe it starts to feel like their natural state, right? It's going to kind of feel like a withdrawal in a way. Your body might not know what to do when the emergency is over. Rest anyway. Mars will be here for 6 weeks. You have time to decompress and to rest. One thing I want to mention too is that Mars in Taurus is in Venus's territory, right? Venus rules Taurus. Mars is a guest in her house, and Venus is not Mars's favorite host. Mars and Venus obviously are in natural tension with each other, not as enemies, but more as kind of these polarities that don't naturally speak the same language. Mars wants to conquer, Venus wants to receive. Mars in Taurus, it really has to operate on Venus's terms, which means it has to slow down, right? Which means that it has to be willing to build rather than destroy, to tend to something rather than to charge. And I think that's a super healthy constraint on Mars's energy. 2.5 hours after Mars enters Taurus, Venus enters Cancer, and our Taurus season breakdown completes itself. Venus in Cancer is an interesting placement to talk about because it is so consistently underestimated. I think that we live in a cultural moment that privileges Venus in Gemini types, Venus in Libra types, Venus in Leo types, right? The social, the charming, the visible, the witty, the spectacular. We know how to recognize that version of beauty and desire and pleasure. But Venus in Cancer doesn't perform. It nests, it cooks, it remembers your birthday without needing someone to remind them. It notices when something is wrong before you say anything. It loves in a way that is so consistent and so present. And I think people often don't know how much they need that. Venus in Cancer is nurturing and protective, self-protective, cautious, fertile, right? The emotional ups and downs under this transit are going to be real. I won't lie, because I think sensitivity and impressionability are really heightened, right? The love available here, it's tender, it's romantic, it's attached. And at its best, Venus in Cancer, it shows love through devotion, but also through like genuine concern. At its most functional, it wants to make loved ones feel safe and comfortable. Cancer is a cardinal water sign. It is ruled by the moon, which means Venus, the planet of what we love and value and desire, is now moving through a sign that is governed by the most fluctuating, most cyclical, emotionally responsive body in the sky. The moon changes signs every 2.5 days. Cancer's emotional life reflects that very, very much. It moves in tides, not in straight lines. So Venus in Cancer doesn't fall in love once and then stay there uninterrupted. She falls in love in waves. She retreats into herself to process, and then she comes back more open than before. You know, she has a shell, the crab. The shell is not a flaw, but I think it's the protection that makes the softness inside very possible. I think the crab is such a great symbol for Cancer, gosh. But what this transit is asking on a personal level, it's simple and not simple. I think the question is, where is home for you? Not your address, obviously, not the building, but like the feeling of home, right? The specific quality of being in a place with a person or inside a practice or a ritual or a moment where your nervous system says, here, like this is where I belong. I feel genuinely safe and I feel comfortable here. Venus in Cancer is spending these weeks pointing you towards that energy. It's asking, what have you been constructing maybe all Taurus season, all this slow building and planting and deliberate tending, and whether what you are building feels like home to you, or whether maybe it just feels like the responsible thing to do. And I think that's a harder question than it sounds. I think a lot of what we build is built from obligation or strategy rather than genuine belonging. But Venus in Cancer doesn't validate building that doesn't feel like home, right? She's not interested in the impressive structure that makes you feel hollow when you're inside it. She wants the small thing that feels exactly right. Dinner table, group chat with the 3 people who actually know you, a morning ritual that no one sees, the relationship that is held together not by drama or chemistry or convenience, but by the daily choosing of each other, right? The 10,000 small moments of turning toward each other instead of turning away. I want to say one more thing I think is politically worth saying about Venus in Cancer in 2026 as well, because I do think it really matters. We are in a moment when care work is under unprecedented pressure. When the people who do the labor of keeping other humans alive, the nurses, the teachers, the parents, the community members who hold things together at the neighborhood level, are operating within systems that are actively devaluing what they do. Venus in Cancer is the kind of transit that makes that labor visible and asks whether we actually value what we say we value. It's the transit that challenges our culture's hierarchy of importance, and I think that is 100% important in this day and age. Money and power and dominance are very Mars and energy coded. But what is Mars in Cancer? Cancer is going to be the person who remembers to bring soup when you're sick. Cancer is the one who stays. And I think Venus in Cancer asks, do you actually honor that? Right? Do you structure your life to protect it? Maybe I vibe more with Venus in Cancer than I thought now that I'm like talking it through and explaining it. Underrated placement, underrated placement. Okay, I want to close this the same way I opened it with the season itself, because all of these transits, the Mars-Saturn collision, the historic Uranus ingress, the Scorpio full moon, the Pluto retrograde, all of this stuff, it happens inside Taurus season, inside the lilacs and the earth and the body's slow return to itself. And I don't think that's incidental. I think that
the cosmos, gave us a season that is simultaneously the most grounded and sensory and physically generous time of the year, and one of the most historically significant astrological periods in decades. All of this is happening while the flowers bloom and the evenings get longer and the air smells like something you can't quite name, but your body has really been waiting for since November. I think that's really deliberate. I think Taurus season is the container for exactly this kind of wait, because you can't hold what 2026 is requiring you to hold if you're not in your body. You can't make good decisions about what to build and what to release if you have lost touch with what you actually value versus what maybe you have been performing valuing. You can't navigate a period of historic information disruption if you don't have a stable enough interior. That is what this season is for. Not just aesthetics, not just self-care, but Taurus season is the annual reminder that the earth is still here, that your body is still here, that there are things that are real and present and worth receiving fully before you give your attention back to the chaos, aka maybe Gemini season. The world is entering a very strange and very fast and genuinely unprecedented period. The Gemini era is beginning. The information revolution is already underway. The political and economic pressures of this year are not going to resolve itself before summer. None of that is negotiable or deniable, but the lilacs are blooming, the evenings are long, right? Something is seeding underground that will matter in November, in 6 months, when we see what grew from what we planted. This is a Taurus season that has to hold a lot. And I think it's going to hold it because that's what Taurus does, right? Taurus holds. That's the whole lesson. That's the whole lesson. You can move through enormous change. You can watch the world reorganize itself at a speed that is genuinely alarming. You can be asked to release things that you loved and build things that you don't have guaranteed outcomes, and you can do all of that without losing yourself as long as you stay rooted, as long as you keep touching the grass, as long as you keep coming back to your body, to the simple physical reality of being here in this season, in this spring, with maybe these particular people and doing this particular work and living a particular life that is yours and nobody else's. I haven't formulated an actual outro yet, but if you made it this far, thank you. Please comment what you thought about this video. I personally think it was a good video. I think that I put a lot of my brain into making this and to having these insights and interpretations, and this was a lot of fun for me to really dissect. I try to give a mix of both personal interpretations and mundane interpretations, but sometimes I think in this crazy world with all of these headlines and whatnot, the mundane can be hard for me to even process. Like, I really try to turn my phone off at all times, and kind of keeping up with what's happening is a bit crazy, aka Uranus and Gemini and whatnot. But I really do love doing this work. I really do love being able to kind of pick apart my own brain in this way and kind of take all these things that are happening to us as a collective, as individuals, and kind of just put it through this lens of astrology, right? I guess I have to plug myself again. Subscribe to my YouTube, subscribe to my Substack, subscribe to my TikTok and my Instagram and all of the above. All the links are going to be in the description box below. And yeah, I don't know, I feel like I said a lot. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here with me, and I hope that you love these insights.